Hi, welcome to the podcast for Chapter 7. In this podcast, we're going to learn about flexible budgets. So flexible budgets, what we do with a flexible budget is shift our budgeted revenues and costs up or down based on what our actual operating results were. So the idea is if our flexible budget would represent what our static budget would have been if we knew exactly the level of volume we were going to produce and sell. So the central concept behind this is if you can tell me what the activity will be for the period, I can tell you what the revenues and costs should have been. So the purpose is to show those revenues and expenses at the actual activity level. And what the flexible budget helps us figure out is did we have good control or poor control over pricing and costing? So we create the flexible budget based on our actual sales. And we apply the budgeted unit price or cost amounts to the actual activity, actual level. So here's our illustration that we had before. And I'll just show you how this works. So a couple things to note. Our sales price, $120 per jacket. Direct material costs, $60 per jacket. So let's just remember those numbers. And by the way, let's remember that one too. Fixed cost, $176. So here is our flexible budget. Let's pretend that doesn't exist. Okay. For the moment, ignore this and ignore this. Those aren't things that we're going to care about right now. So remember, we've already created a static budget. That's our master budget. Here's our actual results. So the first thing we want to do is create a flexible budget. And so the flexible budget is based on the actual volume. But it uses all of our budgeted revenues per unit and cost per unit. So remember, our revenues were $120 per jacket, right? So 10,000 jackets at $120 gives us 1.2 million. So we are building a budget based on our actual volume, but our budgeted per unit cost. Remember, our direct materials was $60 per jacket. So based on 10,000 jackets, that should give us a budget of $60,000. Okay, and then that's how we would go ahead and build that. So one of the things that's going on in the budgeting process, or excuse me, with variances, is there are usually two things going on which could cause the variance. For example, let's just look at our revenues for a second. We thought we were going to have 1,440,000 in revenue. We actually ended up with $1,250,000 in revenue. Why are those different? Well, there are, at least at this level of analysis, two things which could cause that variance to happen. One was our volume. We sold fewer coats than we thought. The other is the change in price. We sold the coats for more or less than what we had planned. So do you see how that is? That's two variables potentially changing. So what the purpose with the flexible budget? Go ahead and write this down if you want. The purpose of the flexible budget, it allows us to hold one of the variables constant, so we can see the impact of the other variable. And in doing so, what we create is the sales volume variance and the flexible budget variance. Now I'm probably going to come back to this in a second, but let's Let's just see. So our static budget variance can be divided into two categories. Sales volume variance. What the sales volume variance tells us is how much was our overall variance caused by our sales volume being different than what we thought it would be. And the other variance is the flexible budget variance. The flexible budget variance tells us how much of our total static budget variance was caused by different costs per unit and different prices per unit than what we had planned, but our volume is exactly the same. Those two together create the static budget variance. So let's go back to these numbers here, and let's just look at operating income, because that's what I've built these slides to be. So our operating income was $108,000 budgeted. Our actual was $14,900, which gave us a $93,100 unfavorable sales budget variance. Okay, how much of that, or static budget variance, how much of that static budget variance was caused because we sold fewer coats than we thought? Well, the answer is that's the sales volume variance. So the difference between 10,000 units and 12,000 units is 64. The reason I know this variance here, the reason I know that this variance here is only caused by the change in volume is because the per unit price and costs are identical in these two budgets. Remember, I use $60 per unit, right? So $60 times 10,000 is $600,000. $60 times 12,000 is $720,000. Remember, our price was $120. So $120 times 10,000 is 1.2 million. 120,000 times 12,000 units is 1,440,000. So the cost and price per unit is no variance here. The only variance is that. So how much of our total variance was caused by the different amount of sales? It's 64,000. Okay, now let's come over and look at the flexible budget variance. Remember, the flexible budget variance has the same level of volume. So what is different is our cost per unit, or excuse me, our revenues per unit and our cost per unit. And in this case, 29,100 unfavorable is the portion that relates is how much of our static budget was caused by that. Okay, so the 93,100 unfavorable variance, we know 64,000 of that was caused by our sales volume, and 29,100 was caused by unexpected changes in our revenues, revenue per unit and cost per unit. Okay, and you can see that I've done the same thing here, right? So flexible units is the actual units sold. Static is what we expected, and that caused an operating income of 64,000 unfavorable, the sales volume variance. And the flexible budget, 29,100. Okay, so that's the introduction to the flexible budgets.